public perception that data centers are taking up power. The reality is they're lobbying for a lot of power, but the reality is only a certain amount that will actually be taken up. That's the true underlying demand.
Hi everyone. So recently, Rhys and I were in Hawaii at the PTC event, and we managed to grab some of the people who are building the next wave of APAC infrastructure.
Yeah, it's actually a really fun event. Just from this video, it looks kind of rough, but we were 4 days in, some hangovers, lovely hotel lobby area.
Well, one of the conference rooms, but it does give off that kind of vibe with the yellow.
Yeah, thanks Brian for setting us up in a nice venue, by the way.
First up, we've got two guys who walked away from really prestigious roles at Microsoft and AWS respectively to essentially run what I guess you'd call as a startup.
Well, did they walk or were they walked by an elite recruitment team?
Well, we're allowed to admit that. I don't think at the time we necessarily were. But we're joined today by Dave Cooper, who was leading the regional planning at Microsoft, and Ben Boudreau, who was doing technical infrastructure design at AWS. Now CEO and CTO at Zerra, which is a group recently launched out of AGP Group, and has got a number of kind of hyperscale projects across India, Japan, and Australia. We talked about what actually changes when you leave a hyperscale environment to join a startup, the cultural change, the power challenges you face, and whether what you actually learned at a big hyperscale is actually relevant to the kind of the questions you're trying to solve for now.
Spoiler alert, some of it is, some of it isn't, and there's some new challenges along the way.
Welcome back. I'm Rhys Morgan.
James Murphy.
And this week we are in conversation with
Dave Cooper.
and Ben Boudreau. Guys, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's always nice to convert business into conversation sometimes.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, real pleasure to be here. And it's my first time at PTC.
Oh, yeah.
Very exciting.
Because they used to keep you locked in a cupboard at Microsoft for that, wasn't it?
Well, there was a cupboard in the dungeon. Yeah, pretty prescriptive about where we were allowed to go and what we're allowed to do. Obviously, a lot of highly confidential information that they like to ensure that we keep inside the walls of the business. So for me, this is the first time to actually come here visibly and meet with customers, vendors, partners, the industry. Really, really exciting with that.
Well, they must be letting off the chain a little bit. There's a bigger Microsoft contingent here this year. It does seem that, historically, of all the hyperscalers, they're even more secretive.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because if you look at the DNA of Microsoft as a software company, they're very evangelistic when it comes to the products and getting their engineers out in the market. When it comes to the internal workings of the business and, for instance, their infrastructure capacity and pipelines that support that, they're very conservative in terms of the message they get out there.
Ben, this is what, year 3 for you?
Second year for me, but yeah, it certainly resonates. There's certainly around comms to make sure that the cake's fully baked before it's presented to the public. So if you come to these events, under the hyperscaler banner, you can accidentally overshare because they've been working on stuff that's going to be public in years, and so it's very easy to forget that what you're doing was going to be not yet publicly known. So a lot of tight communications on comms.
My own trip was seeing which of the hyperscalers are now doing speaking gigs and conferences, because that usually means they're right for a job. There's no individual marketing has been time to start building on the scene. And so this is my 4th PTC. Yours as well.
My 4th as well, yeah.
This one's my consider a baby.
Consider a daughter up front and get her born over the dates.
Yeah. Really. This has been going for 40 years. I was just with a guy who had been to 35 before to sectors. So, yeah, but it seems to have changed.
Does that mean you had 5 children?
Actually, the 2 of them work for him. So he's got a company in New York as a little family business. So they're all in the telecom industry. But that's what's quite funny. There used to be a telco conference years ago, and now it's. I guess you guys will be meeting with power providers, private equity, people who never used to attend this.
That's right. So I actually have been wondering why it's called PTC and why it's not PDC. And maybe Pacific Digital as opposed to Pacific Data Centers.
But this joke, Brian was on the show, so Brian, if you got any watching this, you can change the name up. Dave's making suggestions.
But it's very, very data center. It's just prevalent in every conversation. Obviously, yeah. So it seems like it's evolving with the years. But yeah, lots of data center power talk, and it's great to see it evolve.
Yeah, for us, customers, capital, and then seeing what's new from the vendors is kind of getting a course, meeting our colleagues and the funds in the industry.
It's good. There was a couple of people talk about deals being signed and these are things that have gone into a long amount of progress beforehand. But this is one of the only places where you could have the CEO of a Australia-based company or a Japan-based company and meeting with the CEO of an American company. Both diaries would be nightmares. Yeah, so it's a really good meeting place for the industry. Although I think if we do it next year, we're going to film on day one. So it's going to see.
Our voices won't be so croaky as well. Yeah.
The networking is getting to you.
Hey, someone's got to do it. It's tough. It's a tough gig. Like as I tell my wife every year, it's a real slog. And you said nothing when I go home.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Did you buy you a tiny violin?
Yeah, I think I'm going to hit it in the Edinburgh if I get home, which will be 2 business days from now, thanks to the time difference.
Yes.
But yeah. So you guys are coming on with a new brand now.
We are. No, we're very excited, and something that we had to get over the line just before we arrived here at PTC. A big goal for us was to start the year launching the Zerra brand into market. It's a real symbol, I guess, of where our business has come. So, born out of AGP, a sustainable assets investment company. That company creates and incubates new businesses in digital real estate, energy markets. So it brings its own private wealth to bear to do high risk kind of startup activity in those sectors. And for the last few years, they've been incubating what we call the AGP data centers. And then we spent, I guess, part of me coming on board as the CEO last year, we did a lot of work on strategy, and ensuring we had business plan, a lot of work in terms of cleaning up the underlying components, what parts of AGP go into Zerra, putting a defined boundary around that so that they can be really clear about what the business is. And then, in about 6 months, time to come up with a name.
Well, the name, not Zerra catchy, but I think, Ben, you were the one who actually kind of broke it down what the elements mean. I think that'll be interesting for people to hear.
So it's a combination of Zeta and Era. So Zerra. Zeta representing zettabyte, meaning the huge amounts of compute. So it meant to represent the size and scale of our ambitions, which is what we're out to do, is to build large data centers.
Yeah, but the name is new, and Dave, you kind of mentioned that there's kind of been years of work to kind of get to the stage where you're at now, because I think it's right to no longer call you a startup, but a scale up, or whatever term you want to use. And your team is, how big's the team now?
Yeah, so we have 33 full-time employees. We have offices in 5 locations. So we're in South Korea, Japan, Singapore, India, Australia. So we're probably the biggest data center company nobody's ever heard of. We've got 620 megawatts of capacity under development across Australia, India, and Japan. And we felt it was time for us to pull ourselves out from under the incubation status at AGP and really push the brand into the market. I think it's helpful for customers and helpful for capital as well when they develop with the business and understand what comes out of AGP and what Zerra is as a business in its own right.
What's driving this boom in Australia? Australia is, it's always been a tier 1 market in Asia. The last 12, 18 months has been this explosion of demand. A couple of, one name names, but a couple of big orders that were taken down in Melbourne and Sydney. There's people talking about bottlenecks in those and looking at places like Perth and expansion. What was changed beyond just AI?
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic, and all of the markets in APAC kind of have their own story to tell. If you look, probably the best thing was to reflect back when I was at Microsoft and I was doing the capacity planning for all the regions across APAC. And capacity planning in a hyperscale is a very known process. we have teams that would predict month by month the capacity requirement over 10 years. So very long runway to understand what we need to put where, which allowed a lot of product choices. So we could choose co-location, we could choose to construct our own data centers, we could buy land and bank it. That all changed when the first AI wave came through. And instead of having very predictable pipeline that we could plan and execute against, we suddenly have very lumpy demand signals coming through. And some of them were internal. So the workloads as we launched Copilot and the technologies that are integrated with Microsoft. A lot of them were third party. And the third party ones didn't have 10 years of forecasts to enable planning. So what ended up happening is these big lumps would come through that demand signal process. And then we would have to find a location to sort those. And Australia is seen as a very stable, very friendly, very trusted market. So it was an obvious choice from a geo-political perspective. And especially in the early days, there was some trepidation about where you could put training, where you could put machine learning, what locations might be. And Australia, as I said, very politically stable, very high propensity to take on new technology. We were one of the leaders globally in the original take-up of cloud services. Great educated workforce, very secure environment. So it was a natural spillover out of the US as they had capacity that they need to push in, and it wasn't the availability there.
I remember the anecdote by Steve Ballmer when they were talking about classifying globally for cloud compute. There were always different calculations, and he sort of then took us. This is how it's gone so far. Obviously, extended with line of the pen.
Yeah. And
10, 15 years later, they're looking back and going, actually, that tracked more accurately than some of the internal options. But I've seen that AI now, the line's kind of gone.
Yes. Yeah, so I can't give you the exact numbers, but what I can tell you is I remember turning up to work on Tuesday morning, and I was planning for a certain gigawatts in APAC, and I refreshed our demand signaling tool, and it had doubled overnight, which led to an exciting couple of weeks.
I'm certainly going to be super busy again.
Yeah. So and then that kind of up and down swing, that pendulum has continued again, not due to the internal demands. They're understood very well by these large organizations. They've got great teams that do that forecasting, but it's these new entrants that are coming to market, and the fact that they can't afford to predict their own supply chains of when they're going to get capacity. So we end up in this, and I'm sure probably in your conversations this week, one of the themes is, have you got any capacity in 2026? Have you got any capacity yet in 2027? And they're not looking any further ahead.
Yeah.
And
So this whole neo-cloud segment of the market is much faster moving than that people are accustomed to. And just by asking for a combination of very large amounts of capacity, which also can be sometimes more challenging to finance when you're not one of 3 or 4 AAA rated companies, and then asking for that in a very short period of time. And it seems to be a big challenge for people at the moment. There's a huge opportunity there, and that comes with some risk. You mentioned risk earlier, this being a risky area of investments. This is, I guess, a big change to you guys working directly with the investors. How are you finding that transition, that education process from your big tech background to their, I guess, finance world?
Yeah. I think I reflect on this. So back at Microsoft, I might design a new region. I work through all of the different teams inside Microsoft, gain the consensus, and take that design and the associated costs up to Amy Hood, and it was the CFO, and she'll have capital allocation for that quarter, and your project's got your staff ranked.
Yeah.
And if you made the kind of capital cut, then congratulations, your $6 billion project is underway. If you didn't, come back next quarter. That was how I got capital.
Yeah.
And indeed, after a project was approved, and I really never had to go back for any formal approvals again. We just built it. One thing, Microsoft, it's got very high standards, very high quality and engineering standards, and it understands that comes at a cost, and it puts those standards very high and it's a tender. So we've given a lot of runway to execute. Process to get to that point where you got approval or execute was long and arduous, and often by the time I would get some capacity signed off, the demand chain, or he didn't need it, or needed it somewhere else, and then we started kind of chasing our tail internally, and that was kind of one of the frustrations that I felt inside Microsoft, which was, hey, I can see these windows compressing. And I can see that the engine inside Microsoft was designed against a backdrop of, I've got 10 years of certainty. And when you took all that away, it was really struggling to figure out how to make this capacity come to market. And I think we saw that with some stumbles in terms of being OpenAI's exclusive infrastructure partner. And OpenAI had to extend that so that it could achieve its capacity goals. And to me, that's actually how I came to AGP. So I was talking to Christian, one of the founders of the AGPDC business. He was asking for some help to understand hyperscalers and how they worked, and it's providing some mentorship to Christian, and at the same time articulating some of the frustrations and challenges that I had around. I wish I could just find one partner that could give me colo, give me build to suit, give me powered land, put it all together in package so that I don't have to build these complicated networks between different companies and different contracts. Only there was someone that will come into where I need capacity and offer me flexible products. And so we talked to Drew, said, well, why don't you come over here and build it? Yeah. And that was my journey into AGP.
And but how are you finding now the different work environment, different people, different culture?
Yeah.
How does it compare?
It's really different, really fast paced. So I'm based in Sydney, and that's where the leadership team for AGP are. So it's my capital. So I literally sit 10 meters away from my capital, and it means my capital is very much in my business.
For good or bad?
For good or bad. And it's not, it's not silent. It's got strong opinions, very much founder motivation. So, very energetic, which is really exciting. But one thing that we acknowledge is that we scale our these campuses, that the funding source that AGP can provide will be exhausted, and we'll be in the market looking for more sources of capital, and then the dynamic will change again. But it was a gap. One of the things that was acknowledged when I came into the business is I know data centers, I know customers, I know how to select strategic locations. Capital was a gap for me, and one of the things that we discussed a lot on incoming. But that's AGP's strength. So that was the marriage. I bring the industry knowledge, they bring the capital knowledge. They're a developer attitude. They do real estate development, they do renewable energy development's in their DNA. They bring the capital, and then I often execute in terms of understanding the strategy, where to build, what to build, and how to get that customer engagement.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I think that aligns very much with also why I joined the company.
I was just about to ask the same question.
Yeah. So coming from being the head of APAC at AWS for data center design engineering, one thing I'm acutely aware was some of the first customer impacting large scale events, as they call them, where it's all hands on deck, trying to get systems back and running to minimize the impact of customers. So deep respect for kind of the engineering and technical detail that needs to go into making sure that customers are not impacted based on the workflows that they're hosting. But the opportunity with Colo and then their self-builds, there was an opportunity to kind of mix all these products into campuses, because as large companies grow, there's different teams that prop up, and then eventually large teams. It's very hard. It's a lot of work to make sure that team KPIs are well aligned. And so having all of these options into one campus where you can have early access to market, let's say in a colo space, where you have the optionality and the fungibility to massage that design, but also what the rest of the campus looks like, to meet your own standards or to have your own building so that you know when you can operate and scale your operations to minimize those customer impacting events. Packaging all of those products into one kind of end-to-end developer, operator, partner is, I guess, one of the reasons why joining AGP was appealing to me, and that's one of the reasons I left AWS to come here. What is now Zerra DC, and we're very happy to launch the brand here this week. So,
And how's the one of the things I enjoy about this industry is small data center business. You can, if you have a room where you might have someone who's an engineer, but particularly advanced with discipline, you might have someone who's a IT tech person, a finance bro, all different people who all in their individual fields were experts, and because of the new nature of the industry, they've all been crammed together into a room and told to trust each other and listen to each other.
Yep.
So the dynamics are always quite fun there. Like, you find a lot of education process. I mean, with the guys that you're dealing with now, developers, energy backgrounds, investment backgrounds, presumably they knew little to nothing about how the works and decision process in Amazon or Microsoft. Is there a big education gap process there? You'll be surprised by it? Or?
Probably not, and that probably speaks to the approach that we're taking to building the business. So as you can, myself from Microsoft and Ben from Amazon. So, first of all, we've been very careful to get talent from the market that has hyperscale experience. We think a really important part of our success trajectory is having a deep technical understanding, but also the relationships into those organizations. So, a good portion of our team actually come out of that hyperscale environment. And what is interesting is where we sit and share, how things are.
War stories.
Yeah. And what the drivers are, what the technical differences are, what the risks they try to manage. And that certainly has been a real opportunity for us to learn. I'll let Ben talk about how that's influenced our product design. But then we're also really wary about getting a disparate set of people, putting in the room and saying, build a data center for your first time as a team. Really, really, big risk to add on top of, what we're trying to achieve. So we're very fortunate to extract a lot of talent when it comes to our design and our development that had already worked before at another data center provider. And that team is, pre-integrated. They've worked together before. They've got strong opinions about what they will improve to build better. And so they've arrived not necessarily in that context of we've got a whole lot to learn, but more in the context that we've got a whole lot to prove. And so we're really excited about us bringing that customer knowledge, but technically, commercially, and then this little delivery engine that's really hungry to iterate and improve on what it was already doing in a very successful way. And that's how we've built the team for the business.
That makes sense. And so a lot of your business is around energy, power, from the background, or a big talking point at this conference and every single conference at the moment. One of the things that I've seen a shift is a couple of years ago, and even now you still have these PPA announcements, but net zero policy, big driver for these coming for the end customers and for everyone. But now gas is back on the table.
Yep.
Speed seems to have trumped net zero, or maybe it's trumped zero. But how are you seeing that now when you're going to market, you're speaking to people? Is it about sustainable power? Is it about power now? Is it about grid power? Like, what are those conversations going to be more?
Yeah, so I guess, fundamentally, if I take a kind of personal top-down view, I believe in themes, and I think sustainability is a long-term theme. So there'll be fluctuations in, how much that drives procurement. But in the long run, also, as a business, we have strong conviction that sustainable assets are de-risked assets. So investing in sustainability is both good for capital as well as for the planet. When you look at energy, and it's different market by market, certainly in the US where they've exhausted the utilities and the demand is never ending, then and obviously at a top level, the macro politics there is opening the door to kind of ignore sustainability for a while. You'll clearly have investment that comes and says, by any means possible.
Yeah.
And then you're seeing an awful lot of on-site gas generation behind the meter turning up, and in a few years you'll start to see the nuclear reactors turn on. I think 2030 the small nuclear reactors will already start coming to market in the US.
That's your prediction, commercially available.
I know of several projects that are due to come online in 2030, 2031 in the US.
It's good to know, because I said 2030 earlier and I wasn't sure if I was being overly optimistic.
Yeah. So there's quite a few investments going on in that area. And it'll be interesting to see how that flows through Europe and APAC. I think you'll find sustainability is a much bigger theme in Europe, although that may wane. And certainly in APAC, we're not yet at a point where we're exhausted the utilities, and so discussion around bringing your own power, on-site generation, a bit behind the meter. That I think that's still pretty early days in APAC. But there are some fast adopter markets that you may see, for instance, South Korea will take up nuclear very quickly, for instance.
Yeah, one of the Southeast Asian countries, their Minister for Digital told me back in November to expect an imminent announcement on, I think, 3 SMRs being built in Malaysia, but never came out, right?
Yeah, politically difficult. And additionally, from a supply chain perspective, there is a security issue, not just a toxic material issue.
Yeah.
But the technology in that sector, our perception is based on 50 and 60-year-old, technology and stories of Fukushima, Chernobyl. But the reality is that industry has been developing. Bill Gates has got some great investments in that area. And certainly most of the hyperscalers have made a position in those areas. So coming back to that question, we follow customers. At the end of the day, we have to build a product that they're going to buy. And most of them are still publicly committed to sustainability, which is great. We focus on that.
What's the power story in Japan these days? Obviously, they've had most recently scare stories that go back and forth in the media, whatever I see it there. And historically, it's had a reputation of being a difficult place to do things like corporate PPA agreements, behind the meter solutions. But it is very constrained. It is very high demand. It is almost the current story of the matter.
Yeah, first of all, I guess the backdrop there is very low renewable energy available in Japan, and the renewable energy that's there is a long way away from population base. And the utility market there is old. It's very traditional, and it's struggling through its own challenges in terms of being oversubscribed. So I think, I was talking at the Japan Energy Conference last year, and I was talking with the Minister for Energy, and saying, TEPCO was oversubscribed in Tokyo by 10 gigawatts. There's not 10 gigawatts of demand, but it's people fighting over the same demand. So, I think there's a public perception that, data centers are taking up power. The reality is they're lobbying for a lot of power, but the reality is only a certain amount that will actually be taken up. That's the true underlying demand. But certainly if you were to go and join the queue in TEPCO, say in Tokyo today, in 2031, 2032 in the earliest date that you could receive.
And there's no option there. It was once, I guess we were talking there in an interview, that once the economies of scale reach a certain point, so once you get to sort of gigawatt scale, it does then justify a hybrid solution more so, because just the CapEx involved, the earlier combined cycle power plant or something. If we get to that scale in Japan, are there technical or regulatory obstacles to doing a direct your own grid solution?
Yeah, there are. It's a nascent market for that, though it is being well explored. I think, rather than kind of net new generation, even if you just look at things like battery energy storage, like that's failed to take off in Japan. It's not a great market. It doesn't have the economic support, or the maturity and the way that the grid operates to provide that, and the failed to address that from a policy perspective for many years. So it's not an environment that moves quickly to adjust. And so I see quite a few headwinds with on-site power generation. There's a lot of support for green energy if you, in terms of a popular message from the government, but in terms of action to make that economically viable, it's very low.
Yeah, they turned off the feed-in tariffs a couple of years ago, which was standard along the southern level. That would be thought.
But and it does mean, you'd have a different risk lens when to look at putting something new into that market when it comes to energy, because
Whereas this year, our traditions almost complete opposite story, very, very fast with the market. I think recent conversation I was having at the end of over 20 gigawatts of renewables to come online in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of digging into India. I think it's 4.5 gigawatts, and then new production in less than 5 years, 66% of that renewables, and the nuclear base, and then the rich is gas. So it's a national grid. So that creates an environment where they can really drive the outcomes. So what we're starting to see is a real push to get capacity into the national grid. And of course, then it comes down to how does that trickle down to the locations where you want that power. But we definitely see a really proactive approach in India around energy. But that's a differentiator from an economic perspective, and certainly it's one of the macro reasons why we're invested in the Duke Fund.
Do they operate a single national grid, or is it international? Yeah, that's incredibly complex individual national grid to be strong about it.
Yeah, and so what I think you heard the stories that maybe talk about your experience at Amazon with the different voltage levels.
Yeah, so that would be different, I guess, resiliency of grids across different markets, but in India in particular, depending on the voltage level, you'd see a market difference if you connect to the national grid versus you're at like a still high voltage, but like let's say a lower high voltage. And so that the brownouts you'd get, and therefore the resiliency inside your data center will be markedly different. And so the good thing is that the national grid and the high voltage there does provide a lot of resiliency. The game is to kind of get there because there's different grid levels in specific areas where when you launch your data center specifically at a lower voltage, you would experience brownouts quite frequently, and obviously going in and out of generator backup on site is in and of itself a risk. Fortunately, once we did connect to the grid when I was at Amazon, we sailed through that relatively unscathed. I think the operations team would probably say they were sweating probably too much more than they wanted, but yeah, it is a good feature from the national grid perspective, and therefore there's a lot of resiliency there. I think some people hear horror stories, but it's kind of not the full picture. I think you probably hear some relatively negative stories, but the reality is that there is a very grid that you can connect to that's highly resilient.
Or a stable backbone.
Yep.
It's local distribution rate.
And it's fast, right? Just because of the natural size of the country. So
yeah, as the campuses get bigger, these brownouts and switch around to backup actually have more negative impacts on the community around. So there's a story recently from West Virginia about 6 months ago, and with the data center highways they call it, and from one side had a small burst of a minor blackout which caused the data centers to go on to their battery power. The issue, the batteries cycle for several hours, not just immediately. So when the grid came back on, there was now a dip in hundreds of megawatts of capacity that was no longer drawing from the grid, and that completely screwed up the grid operators' forecasts. A lot of their their kind of redundancy that they were in place. Yeah. Didn't actually cause a blackout for the neighborhood at the time, but this is an area where they're still building more, and I think that's a very developed modern grid system. So I'm going to wake up call for a lot of people around the world right now. But these things actually do go off, or they do change the demand profile, and then AIs understand a much more spiky demand than.
Yeah, I think if you look at training models and with similar story when I was back at Microsoft and we were doing the first kind of relatively large deployments of training to test. And that was one of the challenges that we had to work through right at the start. Is originally when you turned on training, it was done as a bulk exercise. So every GPU, every server turned on all at once, and suddenly you're drawing megawatts and megawatts, and that has a massive impact to the power utility. That was even worse when we turned it off for the utility. And in that example, we actually had to do work with the utility so that we could pre-forecast to then what was going to happen. So we, in 2 minutes time, we're going to turn on, and then we did work in software to so that the servers came on in a staggered approach, so that we weren't doing a jump, that we were linearly ramping the capacity. So I think you do hear these kind of horror stories, but a lot of them were things that occurred during the trials and the early work. I think the far more sophisticated today and much friendlier to the grids, and certainly you can augment that with battery energy storage options to give you a little bit more control over what the grid sees compared to what the data center is using, provide a bit of a buffer there.
Yeah, long term, you're going to need to end up with large user-side batteries and large grid-size batteries. We have huge amounts of intermittent power coming in through renewables, and then use cases of like AI, it's going to be an increasing portion of power, spiky demand out of production, unless you can get convinced data centers to suddenly train only at night or to use their excess industrial capacity. We will need to have some kind of buffer on both ends to allow to filter through. And you guys obviously have a battery business as part of
AGP, and FIA. We partner very strongly with them, and we've actually got very high conviction in the story that you just laid out. If you look at hosting a battery with a data center, there's a lot of synergies that can be created. Some of them are technical in terms of being able to create a facade that sits between the data center and the grid, and be much friendly to the operator of the grid in terms of how quickly to ramp capacity. Likewise, as you said, you can take advantage of renewables when they're in market, use those to charge the battery, and then later on in the demand window, a lot of community would come home at night, 6 o'clock, everyone's got their heaters on, they're cooking, kids are in the bath. At that point, you can draw from the battery so that you're not putting demand on a grid. And I think as, back to that story, what does sustainability mean? It's not just carbon neutral, but how do you sit inside the environment, ensure that you're not impacting your neighbours? So we've got very high conviction that batteries will be a big part of the story, and we're really fortunate to have a sister business. I sit 10 meters away from the CEO of that business in my office in Sydney, so we do a lot of work together. That's right.
And I think that's where sustainability sometimes we think about it in that sustainability. There's a lot of sustainability accounting, but actually the engineering of sustainability with regards to doing all these interconnects and renewables and the batteries and how that connects into the data center design itself and how you can be better for the grid. That kind of engineering, it's not just sustainability for the sake of sustainability. It's actually very legitimately hard and complex engineering that actually adds value to data center development. So we strongly believe that that type of sustainability engineering actually doesn't only just support and is a good, feel good, is doing good for the future, but it actually helps with data center development, and that's one great example.
And maybe tell us a bit more about, I know we can't go into some specifics, but in terms of where Zerra developing and what I suppose is your secret sauce, which is, are you both feeling so confident?
Huh? So what's our secret sauce? Well, first, the markets, we're in Australia, Japan, and India. But I think if you kind of pair back, what gives us high confidence? So the foundation of AGP itself. So Ben Salmon is one of the founders of that business and is operating in India for over 20 years. So he built a very successful real estate business in India, as well as an energy business in India, industrial tech parks, community housing, logistics. In fact, the Microsoft campus in Hyderabad was built by that team. And one of the few Westerners to build a really respected, a very large asset-based business in India. It's a renowned place. It's very difficult for Westerns come and do business there. And Ben built an amazing team and an amazing reputation in that market. And their secret sauce was the ability to unlock how to acquire land in that market. It's incredibly difficult market to acquire land. You try and buy a piece of land, and there might be 70 titles across that land that you have to navigate and augment. And even after you do that, there's still relogements that, that's my easement. That's where I drive my cart through to the markets. It's a lot of complexity, especially if you're doing it in an institutional grade environment. Ben kind of built a team that could acquire land, permit land, and then as he was building tech parks, he had to figure out how to bring energy to those sites. And so, although we're only announcing Zerra this week, there's 20 years of development history in one of the most complex markets in the world, and we're bootstrapped by that capability. So we're not a naive developer. We've got very sophisticated land acquisition, energy acquisition capability, and the secret sauce that we've added on top, as I said, is that leadership team with a strong connection to the client, and understanding of the market and what our customers need, and then that delivery engine, which is well practiced, to sit on top of that development capability inherited from AGP. So yeah, we're excited and we're pretty bullish because it's not a startup in that we're trying something new. It's definitively a well-experienced team that have got a very strong vision about product that our customers need, about the markets, where to go, and how to execute in those markets.
I would say to that point, one of the differentiators or the things that we're really proud of is the team itself. To that point, we're hiring very experienced industry experts that are well renowned across all the hyperscaler names, but a lot of local players as well. We're trying to be very specific and deliberate about building local teams, but that also are supported by our central function. As we know, like from a technology perspective, the requirements usually come from a central team in headquarters, right? Let's say in the US. But delivering locally needs local experts, not just on the technology front, but the how you get permits across the line. Language in itself is an issue, and so the business culture. And so we're trying to be very smart about building teams locally, but also having a really robust team centrally so that we understand and can bridge between, let's say, headquarters design intent and desired outcome versus actually delivering it on the ground. And I think we've been really successful in acquiring talent that can deliver that.
Talent acquisition is the game changer. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Is it really important?
If only we knew someone.
No bias there.
Our market gets more competitive, and especially in enterprise that try to differentiate to provide that certainty to their customers. There's no good me having a banking app where the front screen's nice and quick and responsive, and then the next screen that uses some AI takes a couple of seconds to load. So over time, we still see the same pressures of convergence in digital services. So we're really leveraging that secret sauce on the area of AGP.
And on the availability zone piece, like one of the things I heard in one of the conference sessions this week was that hyperscalers are going to have to get a bit more flexible.
So how flexible are the laws of physics?
Well, yeah, there you go.
So, if you look at it, I think, and it's slightly different with different designs and the different hyperscalers, but fundamentally the reason why availability zones exist is to create physical network separation between workloads. But for a customer experience, I'm just working with one digital service. So when I commit a database record, I need to know that within 200 milliseconds that record is committed. And not only committed into the one data center that I happened to be communicating with, but replicated across the availability zones. And those SLAs, that timing, is what drives the latency time between availability zones. Because if they're too far apart, then it takes more than 200 milliseconds. That means I can't offer that as an SLA. On customers, and my SLA, my customers will go to a competitor that can offer me that SLA. So what that does is it creates a geo ring fence based on distance latency for those services. There are some things that can be done to improve that. There are more modern network designs that are a little bit more flexible, and there's some exciting new developments in fiber technology that are coming out. Microsoft has acquired some companies in that direction that's trialing that in Europe, and they provide a 30 to 40% latency improvement over standard fiber. But if you can imagine, that requires replacing all fiber in a region. And it will happen. It will definitely happen, and you'll see that ability to kind of move out happen.
What's then the issue if, like, you've got more than 3 AZs in a region?
Mm-hmm.
Good thing, bad thing. What does that do to the mix?
So availability zones, adding availability zones is beneficial in terms of provides choice. The challenge that you have is, in general, availability zones need to be balanced. Yeah, because what you're offering is a single service which is distributed. So you can't have one availability zone that's 5 times bigger than another. It doesn't make sense. So adding availability zones seems like a great solution, but if your existing availability zones are already exhausted, it doesn't actually create more capacity in the region. Adding 3 more availability zones to an existing 3 availability zone region creates choice and ability to scale, but geographically that's incredibly hard to do. So what you'll find is there's pressure to ECAP more capacity from existing availability zones. So that's our hypothesis and where we're trying to drive our campus investments. You'll see those availability zones be able to stretch as new network and special fiber technology, which unlocks the physics principles of how far you can stretch. But then you'll also see eventually over time requirement to create new regions. And we're seeing that with all the work in Java and Hyderabad.
Yeah.
These are examples of where they had to spell out of existing dimensions and make those new investments.
Right.
That was good. That was a good last answer. Cool.
Rhys, that was a great conversation.
Yeah, it really stuck to me the power. We talk about power constantly, and I think at PTC that was the biggest topic for everyone. But they were talking about power in Texas and like Japan, India, Australia. I mean, Australia's probably a bit further, but pretty interesting stuff between those.
Yeah, it's an interesting set of challenges that they're now trying to solve. What I also really enjoyed was listening to how their job is essentially quite different now from what they were doing on a hyperscaler. Like the challenges and everything else that goes along with that are very different, and they're kind of, I suppose, having to wear multiple hats now as opposed to being quite segmented previously.
I mean, this is the big talent trend at the moment is, I guess, alumni from the big hyperscalers moving, and they bring a huge network connection knowledge that's really important, but it is very different day to day being in a startup versus being in one of these mega machines. And if you stuck with us to this point in the conversation, you're hopefully enjoying it and not tied to a chair somewhere. So do us a favor, subscribe to us on whichever platform you're on, subscribe to the newsletter on LinkedIn, and if you could do a like or a comment or a share, it helps us to reach more people in the industry, and that helps us to make more content, which I'm sure everyone would love the idea of.
Yeah, thanks for watching, everyone.